Hey Blender users, today we're going to be creating an extreme desert time lapse. First, add in a plane and then increase its size to about 100 meters. Add in a camera and slide it over to the edge of the plane. Switch the renderer over to cycles and change it from supported to experimental and set it to GPU compute. Next, add in a sky texture and it should already be set to Nishida sky. If not, change it. In the render panel, I'm going to adjust the exposure and bring it down to 0.2. Under material properties, go down the settings and change displacement to displacement only. Add in a subdivision modifier, set it to simple, and enable adaptive subdivision. I'm going to set the dicing scale to 3 because these sand dunes do not need a super high dense mesh, and it's going to save on memory. In your material, add a displacement node and a wave texture. Put the factor into the height. Add in a color ramp, and this will let you easily adjust the contrast and the height of the displacement. I'm changing it from linear to B-spline because it gives it a much smoother transition. Using Node Wrangler, I'm going to press Ctrl T, and then I'm going to connect the object into this vector mapping node. Next, add in an empty, and we're going to use this to control the direction of the waves. Add it to its own collection too. Select that empty we just made, and then you need to adjust the scale of the wave texture so it's more visible. And now you can see that the empty is controlling the waves, and wherever you move the empty, the waves go. To add variation to the waves, all you need to do is adjust the distortion, the detail, and the detail scale. Once you have everything set up how you like, with the empty selected, moving up and down will adjust the phase, and moving left and right will offset the texture. Add in a mix node before the displacement, and then add in a Voronoi texture. Move our color ramp up to the factor input, and then adjust the Voronoi texture scale. The Voronoi texture is going to be responsible for the sharper edges on the dunes. And then change color 1 to a black. If you want a fast preview node, all you have to do is Ctrl-Shift-click it. And then adjust the first wave texture to a diagonal. And then I'm going to duplicate this control empty, and that's going to be used to control the Voronoi texture's position. Select the new empty with the texture coordinate and change it to object, and then adjust the scale down. Now we have a controller specifically for the Voronoi. I'm going to reduce the randomness on the Voronoi texture, and then I'm going to rotate it so that it's roughly aligned with the waves that are already there. And then add in a brightness contrast node and adjust that to how you like it. And now select everything that came before the displacement node and group it and give it a name. Connect that same group of nodes to our principled shader's base color, and in between add a color ramp. The left side of this color ramp is the very lowest point on our mesh, and the right side is the highest. Here I'm setting it to a constant, just so you can see how this is behaving. And then we're going to add in the colors that we want. I'm going to use a couple different colors, a slightly brighter color for the top and a slightly darker color for the bottom, and then a slightly red color for the middle section. We need to do this to add variation, especially when the sun is directly overhead. It's just too bright and you don't really see anything if you don't have this color variation. I did a test render and I didn't really like how sharp these edges were. Go into our displacement node group and change the Voronoi texture smoothness. Now we're going to create the bump map for our small sand ripples. Plug that into the normal and then add in a wave texture and plug that into the height of the bump. Using the same method we did before, just Ctrl T to add the mapping nodes, and then create a new controller, and we're going to connect that to the object mapping. And then adjust the wave texture's rotation so that it's going in the same direction as the larger waves. This next part is really about personal preference and how realistic or stylized you want it to look. I'm just adjusting the strength and the size and the distortion of these bands. This is a good time to talk about the performance issues I was having here. It caused the recording to get really choppy at this point, but it picks up later in the video. Having the bump map enabled really slows down my computer. If this same thing is happening to you, just Ctrl-Shift-click a node to preview it, and you'll get much better performance. For the bump map, I just added a new mix node, and then add a noise texture, and set the mix to multiply, and set the factor to 100. Add a brightness contrast node, and then really boost the contrast. And then I'm going to scale down this noise texture a lot because this is just there to break up the wavelet pattern. Now select everything that came before the bump node, duplicate the mix node because we're going to add yet another layer of noise for added variation. You can just quickly duplicate these nodes, and then with this noise texture, I'm going to make it a lot larger, and then bring down the mix factor to about half. And then same thing as before, this is up to personal taste. I'm adding some distortion here to make it look more like sand that's been affected by the wind. And then I'm going to increase the brightness and contrast so that there's a greater difference between them. And then add in another mix node. Duplicate the noise texture again because we're going to do another layer. I forgot to add in a mapping node for the other two, and I'm going to add that later. So I'm going to do that for this one for now, and then I'm going to select one of my controllers so that it will move with the rest. And then with this noise texture, I'm going to make it a bit larger, and then I'm going to scale it in one direction so that it looks like it's been really affected by the wind. And then this is me adding mapping nodes to the other two wave textures that I forgot to add earlier. And then I'm going to connect them all up to the same object. Now, on the last mix node, add in a geometry input and set it to normal. Add in a color ramp so we can control this more, and then add a separate XYZ and plug in the Z. I'm doing this because I want the directional noise only to show up on the flat surfaces like the bottom, and then the more wavy noise to be on the slopes. For further control, you can add in a second color ramp, which is really going to allow you to adjust the edges. Once again, this is up to personal taste, and this was the final result. Now we're going to set the scene up for animation. Create two pyramids and place them roughly where you would like them to be. They're just going to serve as a proxy because the full pyramids are really performance heavy. Then I appended the pyramid scene from the Geometry Pyramids tutorial. Go into display mode and change it to scenes. And then it's just really easy to move the pyramid collections over into your main scene. I put them in their own unique collection within this scene so I can turn it off whenever I need it. Don't forget to switch back to view layers. Next, you just need to move the geometry nodes pyramid into their proxy locations and get the scale roughly the same size. Remember to adjust the white brick texture because it's based on position. Now we need to set up the first pass of the camera animation. Here I am just setting up a couple keyframes, nothing too fancy. And I'm working my way backwards because I know where I want the camera to end. This was originally what I came up with for the camera movement. For the distant background, just duplicate the sand dune plane and scale it up. Go into the camera properties and set the clip end to a really high number so you can see it all. As it's in the background, I'm going to turn off adaptive subdivision and add a second subdivision modifier. And then add a displace modifier. And then add in a clouds texture. Set your second subdivision to Catmull Clark and move your displace modifier in between your subdivisions. Change the background material color just slightly for some variation. On the camera X and Y rotation, we're going to add noise modifiers. The first one is going to be a larger noise, and the second noise modifier is going to be more of a camera shake. And we're going to add this to both X and Y, and you can simply copy and paste it. Now set your resolution nice and low, and then we're going to do a test render. After seeing this first test render, I knew there were two things I wanted to change. The first issue was that the camera spent too long looking up at the sky and not enough time showing the sand dunes. And second was the background was popping in, and I knew this was caused by the micro displacement. To solve the first problem, I simply deleted a bunch of the keyframes at the start and adjusted the camera position here to show the ground for longer. To solve the second problem, I just scaled up the sand dune plane to be both the foreground and midground. So now there was only the background and this sand dune plane. I had to adjust the dicing scale and the displacement amount. But since all the textures are procedural and based on world coordinates, I didn't need to adjust that. I think now it's time to animate the sand dunes. Take your controller and just add 2 keyframes and adjust the location. And do this for all 3 controllers. If you want your animation to have that choppy look, just add it in a stepped interpolation modifier on your channel. It was at this point I realized I wanted even more variation in the sand dunes. I wanted sections that were kind of moving in different directions slightly. I duplicated the entire node group and created a brand new pattern with it. And then, like many times we've done before on this tutorial, I use a noise texture plugged into a brightness and contrast to adjust where each pattern is going to show up. This is just going to add another level of variation, and you can see how they each move in their own unique way. This just provides an extra layer of visual interest and helps break up the uniformity. Now going back to the background object, I want to animate this in the same way using a controller. And to do that, you just go into the modifiers tab and set the displace to object and select your controller. And then I'm just going to animate this moving at a much slower rate than the foreground. Now it's time to animate the sky. I knew that you could control the sun by using a driver, but I didn't know the math behind it. But luckily I found this Blender 2.9 file and it has this driver built into it, and it's Creative Commons. I'll put the link in the description. So I just deleted everything except for the sun position empty and then appended this to my scene. Next, add an empty at the world origin point and parent the sun position to it. Now when you rotate this object, you're changing the time of day with it. Bring that into our main scene, take the sun position object and duplicate it. This is going to be the moon position. In the world shader editor, duplicate the sky texture, and then go one by one and copy each of these drivers into their respective fields. You're going to have to edit the drivers by right-clicking them, and then you're going to have to change all the objects inside to moon position on this new moon sky texture. Link up this new texture, and then add in a mix node and set it to screen. If you get the positioning right, you can have it so that when the sun goes down, it's completely black, and then this new moon shader will be screened on top of that. Now, a quick and easy way to make this look more like the moon is to raise the altitude, and then lower the air, dust, and ozone to your liking. And then you're also going to want to lower the sun intensity really low. Finally, we're just going to animate this rotation. Give it 2 rotation keyframes. Delete the channels that are not being used, and then just pull down this last keyframe to adjust the rotation. Now we're going to create the stars. Add in a UV sphere and scale it so that it's much larger than the entire scene. Add in an emission shader, plug that in, add a noise texture, and then scale the noise so that it's tiny. Control T, add some texture coordinates, and then add a brightness contrast. Lower the brightness and bring the contrast up so that you start to see small points of light. Bring in a hue saturation value node, and then lower the saturation so that they're not so colorful. Now add in a mix node right before the emission. Duplicate these set of nodes, and this is going to be the galactic plane of our galaxy. From our perspective, the stars here are more densely packed together. So bring up the brightness on this to see more stars, and then create a color ramp and plug it into the mix factor. And we're going to create a narrow band, and this is where the galactic plane will be. Add in a gradient texture, and then just play around with the position on the mapping node to move it around. Duplicate the color ramp and bring it up. Add in another mix node at the end of the chain here. Add in another gradient texture, and then change the color of this band of light using an RGB curves. I'm going to add a little bit of blue. Finally, add in a noise texture and adjust its brightness and contrast, and plug that into the factor of the final mixing node. Now it's time to composite. We're going to have 2 view layers. On the foreground, set indirect only on the sky elements. Make sure you set the film to transparent. And then on the sky layer, make sure you disable all other collections except the sky elements. Go into view layer properties and enable environment. In the compositing window, duplicate our input and change the second one to sky layer. Add a mix node and combine the environment from the first render layer and the image from our stars. Set it to screen. Add in an alpha over and connect our first layer image in there. Finally, disable the proxy pyramids and add in our geometry nodes pyramid and give that a final render. If you like this tutorial series and would like to see more from me, remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks.